I'm joined here today with Dr. Carolyn Leaf, a communication pathologist and clinical neuroscientist specializing in psychoneurobiology. Her passion is to help people see the power of the mind to change the brain, control chaotic thinking, and find mental peace. Dr. Carolyn Leaf is joining me here today to talk about her latest book, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, a guide to building resilience and managing mental health. She gives so many practical tips for all of you parents out there. You're going to want to stay tuned to have a listen. So, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, thank you so much for joining us here today to talk about your new book, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, a guide to building resilience and managing mental health. Thank you for sharing your time with us here today.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. Always love having conversations with you, and it's always exciting. So thank you for having me on your show. And I love the new cover in the background.
Oh,
So
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think a really great place to start, and this really, we had a conversation. So for those of you who haven't checked it out, this is not the first time that I've spoken to Dr. Leaf here. And I know a lot of your work typically, and the last book that you put out was about helping adults, right, clean up what you call mental mess. And now you're gifting us with how to help in terms of our children. So I think a really great foundational point to start with is, what do you mean when you say mental mess? And are there particular, I guess, signs or signals or ways that we might be able to know or identify if our children are struggling with what you call mental mess?
absolutely. Well, it's a great place to start because essentially all of us as humans are like little experiments and we like little scientists. And we are, we don't know what's coming up. So we try this and we try that and we say this and we say that and we do, and it's kind of messy. And we have to kind of learn to manage that mess. And at certain points in our life, we don't manage the mess very well. And then things sort of collapsing, and it can shift. And then things from the past of, as we know, so as you know so well, trauma from the past can be triggered, and then patterns start emerging in our life, and that makes things more messy, and they spill over into all the different areas of our life. And we kind of have to realize that we need to manage our mind all the time, because our mind's doing the work. The brain is just what the mind is using. So in the field that I'm in of psychoneurobiology, as you know, I do a lot of research. We've got big studies running, another big one running at the moment, looking at just time frames and time frames of change, and it applies so much to the children's book. And the reason I mention this, and the reason I brought out this book now, is I have 4 adult children, but my youngest patient in my practice was 2 and 3 years of age. And I saw, even at that age, we can teach a child how to manage their mental mess, how to recognize if someone's stolen my toy, to someone's maybe touching me incorrectly, how to be able to tell your story, to give them the tools to tell their story. I mean, just the work that you do, you cannot stress enough how early we should start with helping a child to be able to embrace and process and reconceptualize. So that's essentially the idea, is to help the person teach a child as well as themselves to identify the messes, whether it's whether it's on a scale of 1 to 10, or whether it's a daily struggle, like a little thing, or a big thing like a sexual abuse or something like that. And you can teach a child as young as 2 how to read these signs.
I was smiling when I was hearing you describe or use the word in particular, Carolyn, messy. And I think, I'm smiling so much and, kind of acknowledging that, because I think so few of us, as adults, really are able to embrace that the human experience is messy. I think we get to this point in life where we shame ourselves. We think we should have things figured out. Yet, I think very naturally maybe have more of a leeway, right, with children. It might be easier to say, oh yeah, childhood is messy. There's difficult things that happen, though when we get to a certain age, right, it should become less messy. But I love how you're really embracing the messiness that, in my opinion, right, exists. It is part of the human experience. But I'm interested in, if we're going to say, on the one hand, right, life is messy, I'm really simplifying it, of course, right? How do we make a distinction then between what you might be labeling as different degrees of a mess, obviously some being instances of abuse or trauma or neglect, and more instances of just regular messy human existence? Or does it even matter?
It definitely does, because if you think of it, you've got your day-to-day moments that you have to manage. So there's, like, for example, your sibling steals a toy, or takes a
Right.
toy, yours, maybe not steal, that's a harsh word, but takes your toy, and that's not a crisis. But for you, in that, long-term crisis, but that in that moment is very, very meaningful to you as
Mm-hmm.
a 3-year-old or something like that. So we don't want to invalidate that experience, because we know that even those little experiences invalidated, will grow into big problems in the future. So to be able to have a child understand that when your sibling takes your toy, that's going to make you feel a certain way. It's going to make you act a certain way. It's going to make your tummy feel sore. Maybe it's going to make you think, I hate my brother, when you don't really, but it's going to make you feel like that. To be able to be able to accept that that's okay, that I feel this way, because taking my toy is not great, but I can't stay in this moment of messiness. I can't go chase him and hit him on the head with things, or scream and throw a tantrum for too long, maybe for a little bit, but not for too long. But it's energy that's built up. That child has all that experience as energy in the brain, because it's not nice to have your toys. I mean, it's such a basic example, but not nice to have your toys stolen or taken. That energy is erratic. So we would see that on a scientific level as waves that are like very erratic. Or think of waves of the sea, because I'm looking at the beautiful sea at the moment, and think of a wave that's very big and busy versus a nice calm wave. That energy doesn't just go. It goes, it doesn't just disappear, it transfers. So a young child transfers energy very fast, sometimes quicker than an adult. So it's going to transfer, that reaction is going to be quick, and they're going to react maybe with a tantrum or throwing something or screaming or something like that. It's going somewhere. If we then go and say to that child, that's so naughty, you don't do that, which is a natural reaction, but it's a very messy reaction. And if we can recognize that that messiness actually makes the mess even bigger, if we can say, okay, we don't throw and hurt each other, that's not allowed, but I see that you're mad, there's a reason why, but for now, let's just like keep you apart, and each of you, I'm going to work with you, sit with you in a different moment. We're not together, and we'll sort this out. And you teach them how to resolve the conflict. You don't resolve it for them. Telling them that they're naughty, go away, that's bad, you don't teach them anything. You just teach them that they're bad, and that's bad, and you can't have emotions, and all the distinction between boundaries starts disappearing, because that child shouldn't have had their toy stolen in the first place, and all the things that we talk about as adults. So you can take a simple example like that little messy situation, and you can start wiring in a resilient psychoneurobiological network, mind, brain, body connection at that young age, by saying, okay, let's now sort this out. So the way you do it, the most simplistic way for kids, young kids, is to designate an area in your home. Now, think of it. We clean our teeth in the bathroom. We don't clean our teeth in the toilet. We clean our teeth in the basin. We go outside to kick the ball. We go to gym to a gym environment to do gym. So we understand the idea of designating a space for a specific thing. Why don't we talk about designating a space in our home for dealing with mind? Because mind is everything you do, Nicole, is mind. You're teaching people how to manage their mind, everything about mind. And so that if you did, you wouldn't do, no one would be able to read your book and learn from you. In other words, mind is your ability to experience and manage life. So it's your a priori function. So if we don't teach mind management from day one, it's never too late, but it is our priority. Messy mind, messy brain, messy body, messy life. So if we can designate an area, you teach a basic skill. So for example, you could take, like one of my clients did, was paint a wall in their kitchen with that chalkboard paint, put a cute little chair, like a little bean bag, put a little basket of toys and crayons and paper and chalk and whatever, and you create a space, and that's your mind management space, or your brain space, or your neurocycle space, or whatever you want to call it. And in that space, when you as a parent are having a bad day, you teach the child through yourself, because mental health is managed. The crisis in mental health is going to be one of the ways is help and educate the parent and the adult, because then that transfers to the child. So you model and go, like you have a bad day, you come home from work or whatever, you go to that designated space and you run through this psychoneurobiological system that I've developed called the neurocycle. I know we'll unpack it in a very simple way in a moment. I just want to paint this sort of big picture first. And then when the child's having a bad day, they can go to that area. If a child's 2 and they can't talk about how a child bullied them at school because they don't have the language yet, they do have the insight. Kids are a lot more insightful than we realize. They read body language better than an adult, and they respond to authenticity. So by you being authentic and not pathologizing or suppressing what you're going through, you've allowed them to experience an emotion, experience with emotions, with behaviors, etc. And you've demonstrated a model. So your child comes home from school, they know they can go to that designated space. You've opened the door for conversation, deep, meaningful connection, and they can then start the process. Now, in the book, I'm sure you saw that there's a character that we've created called Brainy. We've even got a little toy. Here's the little toy. See the little Brainy
Oh, I
toy?
love them.
Oh no, I love it. We'll be sending you one of these. So
Okay.
it's super cute. It's easy to hold, but it's a brain. And kids love the brain. They love anything physical. So you are helping to fix Brainy's brain. So this is your superhero that walks the mental health journey with you. And the neurocycle is his superpower. So the whole book goes around Brainy experiencing life, the big and the small things, and what does Brainy do, and how does Brainy do it, and how does whatever. So we've even got a coloring book, Color with Brainy and Friends. So there's a coloring book with scenarios and Brainy's in there, and you can whatever. So that kind of practical toolbox in a designated space is fantastic. So here the child gets in the car, you pick them up from daycare, they're screaming, they're kicking the seat, they won't talk to you, then they roll up in a little ball, you get them inside, they run into their room, roll in a ball, they're crying, and maybe at some point they calm down. And maybe this is a repeated pattern, so it's happening chronically over time. They don't know what to do. You can get frustrated. It's like, it's so annoying and frustrating if you've got other kids and life is happening, and I've got this kid who's throwing a tantrum. So I'm not blaming any mom here. I've been a mother of 4 and worked all the way through. It's not easy. So we need to get our own reactivity under control. So the first thing that I would do is, as the child gets in the car and you see this is happening, if it's a first off, it's kind of easier to deal with because, hey, wow, what's going on? But even then, if it's a first off, that child may be won't they so activated that you've got to try and decompress them first. They won't respond too much. This is where brain is invaluable. Something like this, a soft toy, the physical, the whole holistic concept of, touching something. So you could, have the toy available in the car, any toy. You don't have to have Brainy, but the concept of having something that they know is the contact point, that they can tell you if they can't say the words, they can pick up Brainy. So if Brainy's in the car, they can grab Brainy. Or you could say, you may have Brainy in the front with you, or a toy, or they can remember Brainy if you forgot to carry Brainy. And you just say, oh, I see Brainy is really upset today. Brainy's kicking the seat and Brainy's got a sore tummy. I see Brainy's holding his tummy. What's wrong with Brainy? You've transferred to the threat of me, and I've got to deal with this. I can now transfer to a toy. The child immediately has a connection point, and they can tell you, yes, Brainy, this and this and this. And the child, it is phenomenal. I did so much family therapy when I was practicing for like the 25 years, and the insight that a child has when you give them the tools to speak, even if they're not actually speaking, they can dramatize, visualize, etc. So that whole idea of designating a space, having a physical thing that you can attach to, having a standard thing that you can say Dr. Leaf said, that the brain lady said. So it's not you as the mother or the father or the caretaker or the partner or whatever whoever's caretaking the child. It's not them telling you to do another thing, which kids can often resist because it's actually, hey, let's do this. Look, I do this. If you're doing it, they'll do it. It's a demonstration. There's a story in the book, I don't know if you saw, about the little boy with trauma, which is such a sad story of this child who was abused from the age, sexually and physically, from the age of 3 months. And it was actually someone on my research team, on one of my projects, who was the stepmom, and they got the child once the child was 3, and they didn't know this had happened. And then all these incredible, as you can imagine, behavioral issues, because this child had all this abuse for 3 years. Long story short is that this was a hard, tough job for a stepmom to step into, and to have to deal with this kind of difficult child. Everything that this child could be labeled with was labeled. Let me tell you, this child had everything from autism to, you name it, everything in the DSM. I think they gave this child out of desperation, going from doctor to doctor, and the mother knew this wasn't right. This child didn't sleep through the night. Long story short, the mom was so strained, having to work, financially strained because of all the money pouring into this child's therapies. She happened to be on my team, happened to start using the Neurocycle, which is a system that I've developed. It's not a new therapy technique. It's everything that they would use, everything you teach in your program and your book, and everything you teach in your YouTube channel, in your private club and that kind of thing. It's just put into a way that aligns with the psychoneurobiological networks. It's not a new therapy technique. It's still all the breathing, meditation, holistic stuff, CBT, positive affirmation, psychodynamic, whatever wisdom you've gained. It's just, if you put things into the right psychoneurobiological framework, you actually will create a sustainable change and empower the person to do that. That's really key, because so many people feel disempowered by being told, you've got this by the professional. I mean, you talk about this so much. We want to empower people. And the younger you start, the easier it becomes as an adult. Doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen, unfortunately. Doesn't mean that challenges are going to happen. COVID, social media, that's just part of life. Okay, these challenges. What we need is to teach our children how to manage those. So change will always happen. So this whole thing, oh, our kids' mental health crisis is because of COVID, it's because of isolation, it's because of social media. Those are just contributing factors. They're not, COVID obviously was a problem, but social media is not bad. It's how you manage the social media. Bullying is not nice, but how you manage it is the issue. Your sibling taking your toy is not nice, but it's how you manage the issue. So the neurocycle is how you manage your mind and manage issues from the big to the small. And having that sort of designated space enables you to then process through and have a connection point for deep, meaningful connection. That's a long answer, but I don't know if you want to unpack that or whatever.
Yes. I'm still having a giggle to myself when you acknowledged, children, I believe was the context that you acknowledged it, don't like to, I'm going to simplify it, or what I heard was don't like to be told what to do, don't like to be controlled. And
Yeah.
I was over here having a giggle because neither do adults. And it's
No.
so funny. I find how we literally categorize, right, adults and children somehow as distinctly different when in reality we're not. Us as adults, though, have just gotten better at keeping the things suppressed, not saying them, right? Or dealing with people trying to control us or change us around us in different, more covert ways. But the reality of it is we are still, many of us as adults are struggling in the same way we are as children. And what I find so refreshing and life-changing about your work is not only are you kind of talking about children as not separate creatures, you're talking about them very much as a part of our own development. We were all children once, so that we can not only understand ourselves, we can understand the children around us, but you really do very practically then give tools for the same issues that children are having. We're having them as adults ourselves. Many of us, though, are just so conditioned in the way we've learned how to deal with them, though, to speak to your very wise, beautiful point, and the book that will help so many parents, caregivers of any sort change their child's life is the earlier that we do intervene, and going back even to the beginning, give language, right, to this whole world of emotions. Emotions are energy. We actually don't know why we are wired to experience certain emotions as humans. They're, in my opinion, evolutionary messengers. We all have them universally. We don't universally know how to deal with them. We don't come right with that chip. So everything I'm hearing you saying is really not only creating the space. I love that suggestion of an actual physical space in our home, but I love how you're also emphasizing the role of modeling, of showing these new actions to our children, and how important that is, especially when we're talking about, back to this concept now of the mind, right? Because this is a very elusive thing. It controls these emotions, which few of us do have language to even talk about them. And I really love your concept of thought trees. Because I think there's a really simplified, even visual way for many of us that we can either paint ourselves the picture, or maybe even paint the picture for the children that we're going to be helping clean up their mental mess. What is a thought tree? And can you describe that beautiful way, I think, that you illustrate this connection between our brain, our mind, and the rest of our physical self, or our body?
Absolutely. I love how you just said everything you said. It was beautiful. And those emotions, I'm going to explain the thought tree, and I'm going to bring it back to the emotions and how we can visualize. I mean, just think of a tree, we all know what a tree looks like. So we can just visualize a tree. If we think of what we are doing right now in this conversation, we're both communicating, people are watching and listening. So there's auditory sound waves and electromagnetic light waves. So bear with me. I'm going to give you a little bit of science, which I know you love, and I know a lot of your do as well. And basically that all those electromagnetic sound waves, light waves, and the auditory sound waves, that is energy, and that is nothing weird. It's energy, and that energy is something that your mind grabs, because your mind is actually energy. It's electromagnetic light waves. It's that biofield around us. It's very real. When you die, it goes and everything disintegrates. So that literally can be called a life force, your aliveness. It's how you function as a human. If you are dead, your brain is disintegrating, your body is disintegrating, you're not experiencing life. So when they say, Nicole, that a lot of scientists will say that the mind is the hard question of science. And what does it feel like to be a bat? David Chalmers thing and whatever. I always say, no, that is the most obvious question of science, because the mere fact that you can actually ask that question shows evidence of mind, because mind is the driving force. You are making 800,000 to 1 million new cells right now as you and I look at each other and the people that are listening and viewing every second. If you were dead, you couldn't make those. So what is that life force? It's this force that enables our brain, our body, everything to run. And in that process, our mind is also not only running the heart, running the brain, it's also taking in your experiences, and 95% is taken in unconsciously and goes in, and it literally goes in as a wave. Think of waves of the sea. There's a wave of energy that goes in. It creates an electromagnetic light force. It activates frequencies of energy in the brain, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. And it also changes the neurochemistry of the brain. That then sends a signal to your heart, your hypothalamic, but the whole thing is activated by our discussion. This is going on all day long. Now, this wave comes in, and then it builds like it does on the beach, and then it crashes and makes little waves, and then it repeats the cycle. So every like burst of information that I'm giving you is these waves building and crashing. A child's every experience are waves building and crashing. It's the mind that grabs the wave, directs it to the brain and body, and then creates this crashing effect. The crashing effect causes a genetic response. And when we get a genetic response, what we're basically building is little proteins that are made of amino acids. So just think of little proteins, building blocks, and they build into these little long things, and they grow together and cluster and grow trees. But they, like a tree starts with roots, that's our origin or source. So the source of the experience. In this situation now, what I'm saying and the questions you're asking in the conversation would be the roots. All the listeners are processing, that's the tree trunk, their unique way, because no one thinks, feels, and chooses in the same way. And the branches that they grow, which are happening, it's all happening kind of simultaneously, are different for every listener. So though you have thousands of listeners, the root system will look the same, but the branches will be different because of your interpretation. Now that's what's happening all day, every day, to humans, whatever age you're at. And that's building into trees in the brain. At the same time as it builds into trees in the brain, it's building into literally like vibrations in your biofield and through your body. So you've got this physical structure with vibrations in it. Each little protein holds the memories. So memory is like a vibration in a little protein. It sounds complicated, but it is, but it's also quite simple. Just think of a vibration in branches growing, lots of little proteins making branches. At the same time, in our biofield, in the mind, we've got, if you look at a podcast and you see the little lines forming, that's kind of a visual you can use for the memory, the thought tree in the mind. So in the brain, it looks like a tree. In the mind, it looks like like a podcast vibration, whatever the little lines. And in your body, it looks like a change in what we call the cytoskeleton of the cell. So when you teach so much about how you can feel it in your body, that is because as the mind forms the memory, the thought tree in the mind and then in the brain, it then forms it in the body in that sequence, mind, brain, body. The body holds everything slightly differently to the way that the brain does, but it's in the cytoskeleton of the cell. It's called a microtubule. And it's also made of a special protein. So every cell, and we have 37 to 100 trillion cells. So are we surprised at our PTSD reactions? Are we surprised at that inner child that has been wrecked? It was wired in as that child was being abused. That story in my book that I just told you about, that was wired into these three places. And I'm emphasizing that because that is why experiences become embodied, and why we need to do the breath work, and why we need to do all the different stages. So all of that coalesces, and then we have the stuff, and then we in life, and we are working from what we've wired in. 95% we're not even aware of. So our networks are also looking to protect us for survival. So what we find is that it's searching where are the toxic looking trees, because the healthy trees will look like beautiful green trees, and the toxic experiences are these ugly looking trees. You visualize whatever ugly tree you want, and you can teach this to a child. Take them into nature, show them some trees and say that, and tell them that that tree grew from the roots, and you could grow a tree. I give lots of examples. Get a little seed and grow the thing, and whatever. Show them a pretty tree and an ugly tree. Tell them, if they've had a great experience, say that's the great, look at that beautiful tree there, choose which one you like, that's the great experience. When you went to your friend and they had the party, that's all the roots. And then how you enjoyed the party, those are the branches. Look how happy that is. And then remember when you were bullied and you had that horrible teacher who shouted at you and made you sad, and the kids teased you, that was the roots. And then this is how it made you feel. That's, kids relate to that really quickly. And you say that's what's growing in your brain. And you know what? You can change that tree, that ugly looking tree. You can go and dig out with a spade, and you can go and put plant food on the root food on the roots, and you can regrow the tree. That energy thing we spoke about at the beginning of the interview, the energy never gets lost, it gets transferred. So that toxic tree, if you heal the roots, the energy now goes into the healthy tree. So it now reheals, and toxic part or the ugly tree becomes very small and the big tree becomes very big. That's the kind of languaging that you can use with a child, and they understand that. That's what I did for years in my practice and in family therapy. And I'm just thinking of the work that you teach so much on going back to the inner child, and
Mhm.
going back to and finding everything to do with your attachment styles and all these things. You can this is where this you could, as an adult, this is where I'm having adults saying, hey, they're using this to do inner child work, or to go back into the trauma from childhood and going back, but as almost like your adults, like you do it, adult self with child self. But these visuals can actually help take you to that point. You can get into your child very easily using this. So I've done that in therapy too, where I've literally used the child language to help a person get into that state and then to be able to rebuild again. So that's the concept. So the thought trees are just so visual, so powerful, and so easy to be able to understand.
So I'm sitting here listening, and I keep repeating a line that you said, that really just was really striking to me. And it was acknowledging, I think the way you worded it was, we all think, feel, and choose differently. And I really want to just let that sink in, or just have a moment for everyone to just hear that. Because again, I think this is another area where some of us will even fight that reality. We have this idea that we could live the same experience as our partners, as our sibling, as our loved ones. And we somehow assume that we're all going to think the same way about it. We're all going to have felt the same way about it. And typically we should choose the same thing, because my choice, right, is the right choice, and your choice is the wrong choice. And of course, I'm really simplifying it, but I love how
No,
you're highlighting the
yeah,
uniqueness in each of us, that how that is not the reality. So many of us can live, and many of us have experienced this in our own families of origin, where I
yeah,
know for me, I have two siblings who our lived experience in childhood was drastically different, around the physical presence of my mom, the attentional presence of my mom, other circumstances in terms of the family finances and different things that were happening. I lived a very different experience and a very different relationship with my family because of the difference in ages, not because we came in the same environment, did not make it the same experience for each of us. But the reason I'm not only pulling out your beautiful, acknowledgement for all of us to listen to and allow that to maybe embrace it and sink in, though it's touching on, I love, again, back to this visual of the trees, right? And I can understand now why many of us into adulthood, and why beginning in childhood is so impactful. All of these reverberations, right? The more they become practiced over time, or just repeat it outside
yeah.
of our awareness, the more they do become solidified into our identity. And you speak very beautifully about childhood, and the hypothetical place where our identities begin to come to life, right? Where we supposedly have the safety and the space, and parents who are tuned around us and interested in us to be curious about our developing sense of self. But again, going back to when we did not have that in childhood, some of us, these trees that might not be as quote unquote pretty as we would like them to be, become our identity. And
Exactly.
I want to read out an actual line that you write about in childhood, when we're talking about this developing identity of children now.
Yeah.
When a child loses their sense of self, it can result in feelings of bitterness, rage, aggression, anxiety, worry, self pity, envy, pride, jealousy, cynicism, hopelessness, and depression. This isn't just a child being naughty or difficult. They are going through an identity crisis. And I just wanted to highlight that again, and really wondering what you would be willing to speak to in terms of just identity. I know it's a huge topic, but in terms of, again, this childhood experience, and how these moments of identity crisis do come out for so many of us, because you touched on this a bit earlier too.
Yeah.
Parents have reactions when children have reactions, especially when there's many children running around, and other obligations even outside of children that adults, parents, caregivers have to contend with. We have our own feelings about it. So bringing that up in the context of when a child is behaving jealously, or in a fit of rage, these are the moments, I think, that really much elicit sometimes a reaction from us. But hearing you actually describing those moments, those emotions, as a marker, right? As an indicator of this lost sense of self. So can you say a bit more about that?
Absolutely. It's really, I love talking about this because we also hear so much about identity, but the fact that we can actually look at what our identity is doing, you can train a child to actually look at how the identity is being impacted through looking at 4 categories of signals. You can train someone from young, is a way of preempting what will naturally happen. Like, as you say, different age children, different lifestyle experiences that the parents are going through, trying to do maybe or maybe not do their their best. Hopefully most of the time it's doing their best, but it's different circumstances and how the children perceive it. If we can give a child an ability to recognize when the self is being invaded or being disrupted or being broken down, and you can do that with kids as young as 2 and 3, then you can help to rebuild immediately. So kids are more insightful than what we've given them credit for. The new research coming out, and your work, it's very clear. The whole thing of they must be seen and not heard and all that kind of stuff, and they don't understand and dumb things down is the worst thing that we can do. Obviously there's language adaptation and that sort of adaptation of language and so on, but they are insightful. They know when something's not right. Even from the age of a few months old, they can start picking up when things are not right. So that's very interesting. They also like authenticity. They relate to authenticity. They're very authentic kids. And
Yes.
as humans, we also, these are not things that we don't like as adults, but they are very much there. We kind of think authenticity and insight are adult things, but they're not. They're kid things too. They just change as we become more experienced. So they really respond very well to modeling. They also read nonverbal language better than but nonverbal communication, which is 50% of communication, way better than adults. So if you don't explain to a child, if you're mad or whatever, reactive or having a moment because of life, that they will immediately take that into themselves and think there's something wrong with them. And if you are using things like "you are bad," "you are" language, something that I always try and say to parents, don't use "you are" with strong adjectives like "you are always," "you are never." These are will be absorbed by the child and will wire in as part of their identity. And it may seem subtle and you may not have meant it in the moment, but if you're not authentic about why you said that, that won't go away. That will just cement. And then every time something happens that's negative, it will just build on that. So the identity is getting crushed, and the self value, the I factor, which is the driving force. Nature and nurture are driven by the I factor, which is our identity. Our I factors for me is like critical. We have to constantly recognize when the I factor is not functioning. And the I factor is wisdom. It's a child has wisdom. What always astounded me when I work with family therapy is that you can, and it would astound parents. I always get so kind of excited to say this that I can hardly get my words out. But the wisdom in a child, when you sit with your own issues and you actually say, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you when I walked in the front door, but I'm so frustrated. I yelled at you. My shoulders are so sore. This yelling and frustrations in my shoulders, and I just hate life today." You've told kids 4 signals, and you've told them how you feel. You've gathered awareness, which is the first step of the neurocycle. I'm going to link this to identity. You've told them how you feel. You've told them what you're doing, your actions. You've told them your perspective, and you've told them what it feels like in your body. You've created an embodied experience. You, as an adult, haven't pathologized or medicalized or suppressed. You've actually accepted and said sorry, and you've started giving them a model. Maybe you go to that designated space in your house and you do this, or you walk over to that space. Then you say, you reflect, you go to the next step. So the first thing is just to gather awareness of those 4 signals. Then you're going to reflect. And reflection, and I'm going to link it to identity now, is why? Why am I feeling like this? I had such a lousy day, and I've had so many lousy days, and I really don't like my boss, and I really don't like being so busy, or whatever it may be. So you've done a bit of why, and then you go over to that blackboard idea, or you grab a piece of paper, however you work it out, but be like designated space, and draw some pictures if it's a young child, maybe of a sad face, maybe put some words as well. Teach, even if they're nonverbal or not, they're not right reading yet, they're not literate yet. Still write the word with a picture, because you're teaching the word letter association. So you're activating reading, you're generating curiosity. You then, as you've gone through this process, you've activated so much neuroscientific stuff in the brain and neurophysiology. You've created a situation where your brain, your psychoneurobiological mind brain body networks very tuned in. You've brought all kinds of activation things, networks up that you can use to guide you. You've created a situation for change to happen. You've also created deep meaningful connection. You've also built your child's identity, because you've now valued them as a human. You've said you're honoring them enough that you can be authentic to them, to tell them how you feel and why you feel like that. And then you're sitting down and you're showing them. So you're modeling, but you're also being authentic. You're drawing on their insights. So you're building their value, you're building their self-esteem. And then you go to the 4th step, which is to recheck together. And rechecking is, okay, this happened and I don't know what I should do. And let me look at this differently. And kids will astound you at the wisdom that they'll come up with in those moments. And then you just, you draw all over the board, and that's the fourth step where you collapse everything on the page or on the board, on the chalk, however you've done it. Now you're rechecking, you're reorganizing, you're reconceptualizing, you're looking at patterns. You don't have to solve the world's crises. It's quick, it's simple. And then you're going to do a little action. You close off the cycle with an action. That's how your brain works on these waves. The wave builds, it gets a crest, it crashes, makes little waves, goes back in. That's what the neurocycle is doing. It's doing the cycle, the cyclic process. So we're bringing what we do naturally in our non-conscious mind, which drives our conscious mind, and our subconscious mind, which is a portal. You're bringing that into the conscious mind. So you're bringing a system that is driving us. You following that system, which increases your insight, enables you to see things that weren't there, engages the child, values their identity. Your identity is built through that. Now, take that situation out. And if you just stayed yelling at the child and you didn't explain what it was, or you just suppressed it, or you just glossed over and went on, or you disappeared to your room or came back, or you just didn't talk to the child, they're going to be seen as, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm bad. I've done something wrong. If your child's throwing a tantrum and you say to them, you're being bad, go to your room, you've affected identity, because, and even though you may feel like I just can't cope, that's not a you are bad. They're going to think, oh, well, what's the point? I'm just a bad person.
Right.
My identity is bad. Whereas if you say, hey, what you're doing isn't great, and sometimes bad's going to pop out. It's not the greatest word to use, but if you can say what you're doing isn't great, it's really upsetting me, and it's upsetting you, and it's upsetting the whole family. Can we just go into our space? And that's why I love these designated spaces, and kids will respond to that so that we can sort this out. And that's kind of the idea functioning. So now you've identified, you've validated that the child's frustrated or whatever. You've validated that you're not always going to be happy. You validated that bad things can happen, that you can feel frustrated. That's okay. But that's, you've kept their value and identity in place, because you're not saying you are, you're saying, I see you are in this moment acting in a certain way. So you've moved from the stamp, this, like what is it? This is it, final, no
Right.
change, a description. And that all builds identity. Now, by that modeling, you then go into the deeper things. So let's say you're in a very religious environment and you've been told that certain lifestyles are wrong, which is something that I know you've had to deal with. And I know a lot of people, I deal with a lot of, in my practice, I dealt with a lot of that, and we get so many letters like that. That's also identity. How does a child then work through those kinds of things? That's not bad, that's who you are. That can crush us. Or you maybe, let's move away from the most obvious sort of gender roles and sexuality, which is such a huge problem in identity. It's massive, as you and I don't have to even talk about the numbers. It's so big, but that's a really big identity issue. I think of my own, within my own family, my son is gay, and I have permission to share this. And I put them in a religious school. I shouldn't have done that, but his identity got really crushed, and we had to work through the signals and whatever and sort that all out. And so I saw that happening. Then we see in so many situations where a child can be the new kid at school. They've got glasses on, maybe they a bit more gawky because they're taller, they've grown quicker than the others, and they get bullied for. So all these situations, if we can have created a system that is, I can do this, this, and this. And within the first step of gather awareness, you're dealing with 4 signals: emotions, behaviors, perspective, and bodily sensations. There's many different techniques out there to pull on each of those. And each, you can say 4 sentences, and then you can take each. I feel anxious. What about the anxiety? Let's dig down deeper into the levels of those emotions. What other emotions? Behaviors, what you say and what you do. That's one statement. I am angry. I am kicking the chair, or I am withdrawing. But let's go deeper. What other? How are you saying things? How are you speaking? So you can dig down deeper. Then we've got content to say why, reflect. Then we've got content to now, that's open, brought the tree into the conscious mind, weakened all the branches, so it's malleable. I'm getting down to the origin source. I'm getting to the root. And you can use whatever technique, other techniques in the gather awareness of those 4 signals, in the reflect, all 5 steps. You can bring in all kinds of techniques, things like CBT techniques and visualization. Visualization works great at step 3. CBT techniques work great at step 5, but they don't work well at step 1. And why am I saying that? if you want to change, you have to drive the psychoneurobiological network in the right direction. And what's happened is there's so much great advice out there, but it's hodgepodge. People are using a bit of meditation here, a bit of this there, a bit of that there. And I'm sure you've seen the research, Nicole, that if you just bring things up into the conscious mind, if you just make people aware of something and you don't do something with it, they get worse. It's like trying to fly a plane. If you don't know how to fly it, if you only know how to make a plane take off, but you don't know how to fly, you'll crash. So what we're doing with a lot of techniques is people are taking off and they're crashing, or people fly a bit and they crash. So we want to get it coordinated, because if we crash, it also affects our identity. If I try that and it doesn't work, what's wrong with me? Meditation works for all my friends. Why is it not working for me? That breathing technique, what's wrong with me that I can't close my eyes when I'm breathing, doing a meditation? I remember that's something you and I discussed in one of the interviews I did with you. Some people can't close their eyes because it freaks them out. And that's okay, but then people will say, well, I've done these things, it's affected my identity. Kids are seeing around them the curated lives on social media. Why can't I do that? Affecting identity. Scrolling through social media. If we can teach our kids AI, all of this stuff, if we can teach our kids, hey, as soon as you look at something, or as soon as you read something, or as soon as you experience something, how are you feeling? What's it doing in your body? What are your behaviors? What is your perspective? Why? Write that down. Recheck. What's the pattern? Where's the origin? What's the source? What can you do right now in this moment to get you through the rest of this afternoon so you can do your homework? You build on that skill. You can help a child catch their identity issues quite early on and then rebuild from there. I always
I,
answer long answers.
oh, I love, I'm shaking my head very vigorously. I'm just loving what you're sharing, because you're really talking about, as I language it, building that bridge, right, from insight into action, which really, again, if I'm going to simplify again, it is really honoring the embodied experience. I'm even thinking about that parent that you described, right, being honest with their child in that moment. Yes, I yelled. I am sorry. Here's what was going on inside of me. And those are moments that I think, again, for personal reasons, because we feel shameful, because we didn't learn in our own childhood how to even acknowledge what is even happening, to have those self-reflective moments, to even give language to our child, to, again, this idea that children are not developmentally, able to tolerate the reality of what's happening, completely, though, overstepping the reality that they're tolerating it anyway, though without our, right, explanation, our language. And to go back to what you were sharing, they will, in their own minds, make their own sense of it, and all roads will lead back to some statement based on their identity. So all of the parents listening, again, it is of such great value to be honest in those moments, because our children are sensing and sometimes are on the receiving end of our explosions, right, of our implosions. And this is really bringing, I think, a great place before we end our conversation here, because this to me is tying my brain to what you talk about in the book, which is the concept of resilience, right?
Yeah.
And you write an absolutely beautiful line. This all goes back to, right, this idea of identity, right? And who am I? And I can have all of these embodied experiences, but can I create space to be curious and discover this self, a self that over time can become resilient? Reminding all the listeners, right? Resilience is simply our ability to deal with stress, upsetting other upsetting emotions, to be able to rebound, to be able to come back and be calm and be grounded and tune into ourselves and what we need to do instinctually. So that is essentially what resilience is. And you write in your book, I think it is so beautiful. You write a line that says, protecting our children means teaching them how to manage life, even when we are no longer there to protect them. I'm going to read this again because it's so beautiful. Protecting our children means teaching them how to manage life, even when we are no longer there to protect them. And in my opinion, again, this is what resilience is, that ability. And again, this is another area, not being a parent myself, I can't imagine how it is to even call to mind this awareness that there will come a time where you aren't able to be physically present, right? Emotionally present to help your child or support them. There will come a time where they are on their own, right? And that, again, I could not agree more. I'm having chills as I'm reading this. In my opinion, that is what this work is about. Parenthood, especially, is actually imparting the tools so that our children can, right, explore themselves. So can you say a little bit about kind of how this progression then, in your opinion, leads us into, and what your mind says about resilience and what it means to you and to children in general?
Oh, I love how you phrase it. It also gives me chills down my spine too, because it actually, thank you for highlighting that. And resilience is something that's actually in us. literally are resilient beings, but it's got to be unmasked. So through the challenges of life, we unmask. So if we bubble wrap our kids, like the current philosophy is very predominant, don't, any emotion is bad, and there's something clinically wrong with your child if they have depression. Not at all. Depression and anxiety, intrusive thoughts, these are your best friend, and we got to teach our kids this, that these are your best friend, because if you're feeling a bit depressed, they're not illnesses or brain diseases, which is just not even science. They are actually informational messages. You mentioned messages before. I talk about them as informational warning signals. It's the same thing. So if we can teach a child that, okay, I don't feel so great now, I'm actually feeling really sad, I don't even get out of bed, I don't want to talk to anyone, that is okay. It's okay to be a mess. It's a message. Let me be curious about that depression. Let me dive in deep. When you do that, you start unmasking the natural resilience that's inside of you, and you start seeing that challenge, and you're more easily able. Resilience will look like this. If the depression, you're feeling so depressed, you can't get out of bed, you're just so anxious every time you do socially interact with people because of what happened at school or whatever the case may be, then those periods get shorter and shorter. So resilience reduces the feeling of the depression going to this level where it's out of balance. Resilience means, as I practice going through the challenges of life, I drop down, but I get back so much quicker. So maybe before I stayed here for this long, and now I'm doing this, and it's not going down so much. So I'm still going to get depressed. Good. It's message, it's an informational signal. And that's huge in resilience, Nicole, to teach children not to be scared of those so-called bad emotions. And I'll even go as far as to say there are no bad emotions. And that links for me very much ties into the concept of resilience. The other side of resilience, and I agree with you all that, being able to bounce back, the science of resilience shows that it's unmasked. And if we tell a child that emotions are bad, you mask, you don't develop. So unmasking means I can now see it and now I can grow it, but you can't grow it. The child has to grow it. All you can do is prompt the process of, yes, it's okay. And that's where the modeling and everything you've spoken about is allowing the child to develop that skill of resilience. I mean, develop the unmasking and then, to unmask and then develop the skill. We've got to let them practice. They have to go through. The other side is that most people do, the statistics show, will bounce back pretty quickly. And those that take a little bit longer, that's okay. Eventually you will get there. The beautiful side of resilience is a very interesting side of resilience that's very easy to grow. And the neurocycle can be used for that as well. This 5-step process is also focused on the good stuff. Remember the example of the tree I gave where you've got the beautiful tree and you focused on that first? If you're going through the day, this is for humans, not just for kids, and something great comes back. Like every time I think of a conversation with you, I'm always, and I love your work, whatever. So I'm using this as an example. So if I think back to our conversations, that's a good, happy tree. That's a great, curious, deep thinking, challenging, the tree that I enjoy to go and visit. So if you pop in my mind in this conversation, I'm not going to just let it gloss over. I'm not going to just let it pass by in 2 seconds. I'm going to take 10 or 20 or 30 or even 60 seconds to just gather awareness. How did I feel? What was my bodily sensation? Quickly go through those 4 signals, because those 4 signals are like balloons and they are attached to this tree. And this tree is going to come from my non-conscious into my conscious mind. So as hang on, that conversation, then I dive in deep. Why did I enjoy that conversation? And I may not be in a place where I can write things down, but I can visualize like I'm taking an iPhone movie, like a video on my phone. I can recall in my mind. I can watch as I'm watching you and I. And that in itself is doing tremendous things in the brain to build resilience. And I'm going to make my point now. And then I can recheck, okay, what can I learn from this? I learned so much more about identity or whatever. And then action. That was a great, I love that moment. Kind of full stop on the sentence. That could take me 30 seconds to a minute. I have just pulled on a memory that is now grown bigger. Whatever you think about the most grows. So I've created a bunch of memories. This conversation is at least 3,000 bits of memory at the moment in a thought tree. I've pulled that up. It's great and it's healthy. As I'm thinking about it, it's generating an energetic change inside my psychoneurobiological network that is very positive. When you grow ivy, you generally have to grow it on a lattice first. Okay, so this is what these kind of grab a good moment and grow it for, but you're growing a lattice. So when you go into a situation, this conversation may be completely unrelated to some kind of challenge that I may be facing in the next 24 hours. But because I did this consistently and whatever, I've now developed the skill of unmasking my resilience, and I'm wiring in all this very healthy strength into the psychoneurobiological network. And that will help me get this back quicker. And that you teach with kids from young. So it's a skill we can develop. Does that make sense? That was a
Oh
long
my gosh, I am loving this so much. I'm really loving you highlighting the reality that we do have this internal, reservoir of we are able, we are capable, and again, we have learned. And I love your description too, because the number one thing that I had heard most commonly when I was seeing clients is actual verbalization of that fear, especially those that fell into the depths of a depression or were so anxiety ridden that they literally couldn't leave the home or agoraphobic, right? They would actually, these clients would voice to me that exact concern. I am
Yeah.
so afraid to feel any version of sadness or worry or anxiety because I'm so afraid of falling into that depth again and not being able to come out, or really simply not feeling resilient enough to, right, kind of come back up, like you were using that beautiful that visual. And when we have, and it's understandable, it's natural, and we have reached the depth of suffering or have lived an experience that was so painful, why would any of us want to go back? And our mind will then have that memory. And I love how you're now shifting focus, because I think these are the small ways that we can begin to create such significant change. Though these are the small moments that I'll at least speak for myself. I override many positive, I don't hate using those type of
No,
qualifiers,
I
but
also, yeah,
joyful, light, right? Thoughts can come into my head multiple times a day. But the question though is, how much time am I spending on them? Am I
exactly.
so likely just to be like, oh, that was nice, on to the next thought, which might not be as nice, or am I actually hitting that pause? And I can't
Exactly.
help, but I know we've woven, while the book is about helping our children, right, clean up our mental mess. I'm holding it up again. So much of this has conversation has been the theme too of parents. And again, I can't help or being the adult, right? Because we have that child inside of us. And when we are interacting with our children, I can't help but think how so much of these practical tools that are in the pages of the book are so helpful for the parents themselves too.
Oh,
Whether
yeah.
it's highlighting these positive moments or these joyful moments and spending a bit more time on them, whether it's the suggestion that you beautifully gave earlier, having an actual place in our home to designate to the reality that this whole lived experience of being human is beyond just the thoughts in our mind. It's the feelings in our body. It's, kind of all of this other stuff that many of us do struggle to give words to use these then practical suggestions of modeling through your very beautiful neurocycle, these actual steps, how much value all of us listening, whether or not we are in care of children or not. And also, I guess, highlighting, I think it's important to acknowledge the difficulty, right? If we are an adult, right, and we might very well intentioned pick up this very beautiful book that it will be published very soon. We might be reading this book and we might struggle in those moments. We might struggle to embody our own feelings. We might struggle to embody and to speak our own truth. We might be struggling as well, not because anything is wrong with us, not because we're a quote unquote a bad parent, but because again, no one gave us these tools ourselves
That's
in our
exactly.
own childhood. And I just want to emphasize that because again, so many well-intentioned parents out there, I imagine, right? We jump to these books and we imagine, oh, it's going to be so easy. I'm just going to apply these protocols, right? And create this change. But the reality of it is we are an embodied creature
Exactly.
applying these tools. And if
Takes
we're
time.
not able to model them ourselves, it's going to be incredibly difficult to then gift these tools to our children. Though, as we do begin to model these tools for ourselves, the life-changing impact, in my opinion, that it can have on our children.
Oh, it does. It changes them, and I'm so glad you mentioned about sort of the time frame. It's I always say to people, because part of the work I do is looking at habit formation and the time frames, and we know that it doesn't happen in 21 days. That's kind of common knowledge, and it takes around about 59 to 66 days to change a psychoneurobiological network. So there's a pattern in your life or your child's life that is a pattern, means it's chronic, it's there for a period of time, and it's disruptive. You're not going to fix this in one neurocycle. It's going to take a diligent, guided, planned daily 5 to 15 minutes, maybe a little longer each day for around about 9 weeks. And you may think, I don't have 9 weeks, but my challenge to oyster out there, Nicole, is for people to recognize, hey, you may not have 9 weeks, but in nine, your brain's changing every moment. So is your child's brain, and life's still happening. So either you can direct the process, and then in 9 weeks' time, you've radically changed a life, identity, etc. You've built a tool, you've activated resilience, or you just carry on doing what you're doing. It's changing anyway. So my whole thesis is, okay, well, don't you want to direct the change and use all the great wisdom you have, put it in a framework that actually does change the neurobiological network, which changes a person's life, and that's where mental health can come out of. So
I
I'm going to throw that in there.
Oh, I love this. I think this is a beautiful place to end with such an empowering message from you, Dr. Leaf, because that is, again, in my opinion, the reality, right? Is that so many of us, it is a matter of unearthing, right? Unearthing this resilience, unearthing these small moments of empowerment that very few of us feel we have in our daily life, but we can begin, right, through tools and conversations like you and I are having, tools like will be within the pages of your book, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, A Guide to Building Resilience and Managing Mental Health. And in my opinion and my hope that the field itself, and again, this is a deeper conversation for a different time, but my hope is with you continuing to put out the work and so many other humans beautifully shifting this focus. My hope is that we do see a greater paradigm shift in the field of itself into a more holistic way to understand, speak about, and manage, if you will, mental wellness in general. So thank you, thank you, thank you, as always, for doing your part in leading what I believe is a world-changing revolution. I'm honored to be a part of it alongside of you. Thank you for taking the time this morning to have another chat with me. And as always, we'll make sure everything is linked below, where to find your new book, if anything you want to, though, impart us with, or where we can find you or stay connected to you. Anyone who hasn't followed along yet with any of your work, please let us know before we end. And thank you again, Dr. Leaf.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. You're always such a honey to talk to, and the joy that I get out. As I said, you're one of my good trees there. So, and you're
Thanks.
brilliant. You doing and what you've done, how you've revolutionized people's lives is just, it's inspiring. People can find me. Instagram's always probably the easiest place, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and from there they can get everywhere else. So, my podcast is also called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, and you've been on there a few times, and will be on there many more times. So, thank you as well for everything you do.
Of course, I look forward to our continued conversations. And as always, thank everyone for tuning in. We'll make sure all the information on how to stay connected with Dr. Leaf is below, and also how to find our new book, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, A Guide to Building Resilience and Managing Mental Health.